Okay, colleagues, greetings. Hopefully, we are live. So, the nominal topic of the lecture is going to be Heidegger, and in fact, our home assignment is going to be on Heidegger. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, and a lot of things in general I want to do with the course. So we're gonna see exactly how much Heidegger I actually managed to slip into this class. So our home assignment is actually gonna be. I need to talk about home assignments at great length at some point. It's gonna be from this book by Brian McGee. There's a wonderful dialogue between Brian McGee and Hubert Dreyfus. I think Hubert Dreyfus died very recently. He was a leading scholar in the Anglo-American tradition, leading scholar of Heidegger, and they have a very nice, very clear presentation. So in an important sense, I don't need to worry too much about introducing you to Heidegger because I can hopefully refer to that introduction. But anyway, so let me try to take a step back and let me try to take, this lecture is maybe going to be slightly slower. And it's also, I want to maybe, give you vision. Details, there will be time to talk about details, but I want to focus on the large vision. So, first of all, right, we are talking about naturalism. And that's a very ambitious picture. It's a picture that we should take with a grain of salt, definitely. But at the same time, I also think we should take it seriously. So maybe, I could begin with this in general, with this discussion. So I have, so to speak, 3 rules of method. So it's like, why am I talking about this? Because in many ways, like the longer I teach, the more I realize that this is my program. This is my program. I am a believer in naturalism. I'm a proponent of naturalism. I'm an advocate of naturalism. But at the same time, the philosophical ethos, the ethos of doing philosophy, there's a difference between doing philosophy and being a preacher. I'm not trying to be a preacher. I'm not trying to convert you to my side. At the end of the day, it's not like I have a stake in naturalism being true, right? This is me trying to think through, again, as I previewed in our very first lecture, what is a human being? What am I? What are you? That's, I feel that's in many ways maybe the most important questions philosophers can ask. And so I'm trying to think through this question because I care about this question deeply. And I feel that this is a deeply pragmatic question. So let me maybe even before I talk about my 3 rules of method, let me talk about, again, this is a reminder. You've heard me say this before, but I told you it's going to be a programmatic rambling lecture. I'm going to repeat myself a lot. I feel, especially repeat myself a lot from other classes, and we'll see how much Heidegger I'm going to actually be able to slip into this lecture. But again, I feel that situating Heidegger in an appropriate context is going to be more important. In fact, I have a lecture about Heidegger from last year. It's not the best lecture I've recorded. I'm hoping to do better. This lecture is not going to be my best attempt at Heidegger. This is going to hopefully come sometime this year. But in any case, so my 3 rules of method are skepticism, fallibilism, and empiricism. And I'm going to talk about them in a moment. Before I talk about them, I want to, again, restate my general commitment to the philosophical enterprise as a practical enterprise. Again, I keep talking about this. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to see first-year students, which is always a very nice experience. And I will be talking to them about why I think philosophy is important, right? And this has always been my approach to philosophy. Philosophy should be to the soul what medicine is to the body. Philosophy should be to the soul what medicine is to the body. The ancient Greeks believed this, and the sort of ancient Chinese and ancient Indian philosophers I read, they also believe that. Okay, so again, and some people are, and students often ask me this question, but why do we need to engage in philosophy at all? Why do we need to do philosophy? And my response to that, sort of in line with the ancient traditions that I find, if you look at Plato or Aristotle or before them Socrates, very importantly, if you look at Socrates, or if you look at the Buddha, or if you look at Lao Tzu in Tao Te Ching, right? Why do they do philosophy? And I think the answer is very clear. They do philosophy because our life is a problem for us. Like, we don't live in a world which is perfectly our home, right? It's like you wake up in the morning, and again, it's like, okay, so this is my attempt to slip in Heidegger from the very beginning, right? We find ourselves thrown into this world without a manual, and our existence is an issue for us. It is a problem for us. We cannot choose not to care. I mean, you can do certain, usually damaging things to your body to make yourself not care. But in general, it is a difficult enterprise to not care about your life, to not care about our well-being. So our existence is a problem. And if somehow is always already imashon, right? Is always, as Heidegger would say, our existence is a problem for us. And if your existence is not a problem for you, then, feel free to tune out. Feel free to tune out of this course, to do something else. But that's, I don't find that to be a very reasonable proposition. It's like, again, the Buddha, we're going to talk about this at some point. I need to do a proper lecture on the Buddha, right? So the story is told for a reason. The Buddha lives in a palace. Before he becomes enlightened, because the Buddha, of course, is a title. So before he actually becomes the Buddha, he exists according to the story, according to the legendary story, if you want. He exists as Siddhartha Gautama, right? Shakyamuni, the prince of the Shakya tribe. And according to the story, and the story is told for a reason, he has everything a human being can possibly want. He's a young, healthy prince. He's excellent at everything he does. And he has a loving, beautiful wife, whom he also loves with a passion. They have a wonderful son who is healthy. So you understand. So it's obviously an exaggerated story, but the point of the story is that the young Siddhartha has anything and everything a person could possibly want, and yet he goes out of his palace in a chariot, and he sees 4 visions. He sees a sick person, an old person, a dead person, and a meditating monk, right? And it's a very, very important moral in the story. It doesn't matter how much stuff you have. It doesn't matter whether you drive a Porsche or whatever, right? We all get sick, we all get old, and we all die, right? So our existence is always a problem for us. And maybe at this particular exact moment, you're feeling fine, but that's not the solution to the problem of life for all times and places. So, and in this sense, I understand I'm rambling a bit. So it's like, this is not a very focused introduction, but, I'm trying to approach this from different angles. Maybe some of these angles will stick. So I want to say, what do we want in life? What is the purpose of human life? And that's purpose of existence. And that's a very big, very bombastic question. And I do not want to jump to conclusions. But at the same time, I want to give a kind of a preliminary answer. And the kind of a preliminary answer, and again, I have this skepticism, fallibilism, and empiricism. I'm not sure if I'll be able to explain them today. But still, right? So it's like, if human beings somehow had access to the understanding of what values with a capital V are. What are capital V values? Are we going to talk about Leibniz today? Well, maybe. I don't know. Let me add Leibniz to the list, because I kind of want to talk about Leibniz and in general the teleological worldview. So, but the contention is that, again, since ancient Greek times, we do not know what values are. We do not have access to capital V values with, it's like in an unproblematic fashion. And there's an interesting relationship between philosophy and religion, and it's like, I want to signal this, right? I feel religious traditions are very diverse and very interesting and very instructive. It is important and good to look at ancient religious traditions. In fact, starting tomorrow my class in history, world intellectual history begins. And we're going to talk about the Rig Veda and the Upanishads and, ancient Chinese and the Hebrew Bible. And there's a lot to be learned there. I'm not trying, in no shape, matter, or form am I trying to dismiss that. These are all very interesting, beautiful books which teach us a lot about human existence and human history. But you cannot just say, oh, we don't need to do philosophy because this book or that book has it all figured out. I don't know, maybe just for fun, maybe I should do this, right? So if you take these two books, the Bible, this is the Christian Bible with the Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible, which the Christians call Old Testament, right? And this is one particular version of the retelling of the stories of the Buddha. These are different books, and they talk about different things, and they give you different life advice. So you see, to say that, okay, I'm going to have prophets from God who are going to tell me what is truth, that's not going to work, because you have different prophets and they talk about different things. And, for people who are tempted to think about this, think about the 30 Years' War. 30 Years' War, right? And a quarter to a half of the European population died. So a quarter, the estimate, this is historical estimate, a quarter of the entire population of Europe, I would imagine Western Europe. But then in certain parts of Europe, especially what today is Germany, a quarter of the population dies because, this is, 30 Years' War is a complicated conflict fought for all sorts of reasons, political, economic, whatnot, but also for religious reasons, because people cannot agree on how to read this book. Notice, sorry, I keep talking about this is a book. This is not a book. It's a library. It's a library of texts written at different times, at different places, by different people, for different reasons, with different theologies. And you can try to interpret this book as if it has only one theology, but that's an interpretive move. The book does not interpret itself. And, all the books of the major world religious traditions, like the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, are like that. They are polyphonous. They have multitudes of different possible interpretations. And we'll also, at some point, I hope we'll talk about this in philosophy of science. Like, data does not interpret itself. Data does not interpret. You cannot just look in the sky and see the formulas, right? You need to interpret data. And books, ancient texts, are also data, and they can be interpreted in different ways. So, like the motions of the skies. Maybe I should make this a new slide. I understand I'm talking about everything at the same time, but this is not chaos. This is a programmatic lecture. I'm trying to, give you broad brushstrokes on the outlook. So I'm talking about interpretation of texts versus celestial objects or natural phenomena. You understand? Natural observations. Interpretation of natural observations. And what I'm driving at is that the data, let's say the experimental data or the observational data, does not interpret itself. So, for example, it's like apparent motions of the planets are consistent with Ptolemaic ancient astronomy, but also with there's a very famous Tychonian system due to wonderful Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. It's not Ptolemaic and it's not Copernican. Tychonian system. I think it's Tycho Brahe, something like that. Look this up. It's a very interesting system. It's different. It has it has Earth at the center of the universe. The sun revolves around the Earth, and everything else then revolves around the sun. So it's kind of a midway between Ptolemy and Copernicus. Consistent with Ptolemy, Tycho Brahe, Newton, but also Einstein. Right? Apparent motions of the planets are consistent, especially given, especially if your observations are not precise enough. Right? So, in a similar fashion, you have exactly the same problem. So the data does not interpret itself. So, like science, this creative input, it's about creativity. And it's not like one model is proven true, another model is disproven. No, it's like models are more or less useful, not true false. So, I could add Ptolemy, Tycho Brahe, Newton, Einstein, flat earth is also here. It's not that we can prove that flat earth is false. No, it just pragmatically appears less useful, more cumbersome, uses more auxiliary hypothesis. So this is, let me, again, for people who maybe are going to want to do presentations about this, I'm going to get to interpretation in human sciences. In the human sciences, this is known as the hermeneutic circle. Hermeneutic circle. That you always rely on assumptions. In the natural sciences, this is known as theory ladenness of observation. Ladenness of observation. Technically speaking, again, so hermeneutic circle, this is due to Friedrich Schleiermacher. And theory ladenness of observation is, so this would be, again, Schleiermacher. Well, Schleiermacher, Heidegger, and Gadamer. Hans-Georg Gadamer is actually my favorite, my most favorite philosopher whom I never mention. My most favorite philosopher, top one favorite philosopher whom I never mention, never, ever, ever. But I love Gadamer dearly. He's a student of Martin Heidegger. So theory ladenness of observation, and I want to say that there's a deep analogy between the two. Ladenness of observation, this is Pierre Duhem, Willard van Orman Quine, Thomas Kuhn, and this is also sometimes known under the heading of irrationality of theory choice. Irrationality of theory choice. And another important word, incommensurability. Incommensurability. And again, this, in many ways, this has to do, this whole discussion has to do with the underdetermination of theory, underdetermination of theory by evidence or something like that. It's like of your conclusions by your evidence. Like you cannot, again, it's like, see, the stars don't tell you what the truth is. Like always, there's always limitations. There are always limitations. There are, and again, this is a very important story. I need to maybe devote a whole separate lecture to the active character of perception. That human beings have to actively bring notions and categories of understanding to the world. So limitations of human knowledge, right? And again, the idea being that human knowledge is not passive. So human mind is not passive but active. This is to say that perception is to some extent like imagination. That again, we have to actively bring assumptions to bear, actively bring assumptions and categories of our thought to bear on the world. Like we look through this active prism, right? And again, the idea is that let me try to give a clear example. Humans cannot see infrared. So when I look at this room, this particular picture I see. Frogs, as far as we can tell, can see infrared. So when a frog looks at this room, a frog sees something different. But notice, the room is the same. The room is not different. Our perceptual apparatus is different. So the perception changes, not because the world changes, but because your categories change. And you can compare a frog to me, we have different eyes, or you can compare Ptolemy to Copernicus. So you see, frog and me, we have different eyes. I cannot see infrared, a frog can see infrared. And Ptolemy and Copernicus have different eyes. Ptolemy cannot imagine that the sun is the center of the solar system, and Copernicus imagines that. And Newton looks at the world with a completely different eyes. And like technically speaking, the sun is not the center, but the solar system has a center of mass. And that's very different, conceptually, it's a very different thing, right? To say that there's this object, substantial object, the sun, maybe it's sacred, maybe, because allegedly, apparently, Copernicus was inspired by ancient Greek sun worshippers who thought of the sun as a god, right? So it's one thing to think of a sun as a god with a soul, and it's another thing to say that, physical systems have centers of mass, and it just so happens that most of mass of the solar system is concentrated in the sun, and that's why the center of mass of the solar system is approximately like 99%, something 99 point something percent is at the center of mass of the sun. But you see, it's a conceptual leap. It's like being able to understand this is like being able to see infrared. Like your experience changes. This is also, I'm trying to slip in Heidegger as much as possible. This is also very important for Heidegger. Heidegger is going to say that we understand this world because we have certain attitudes to this world. I think the word that Heidegger uses is existentials, existential categories. Like, for example, we see this world through the prism of our finitude, through the anticipation of death. So it's like you can see infrared and the room looks different. Heidegger says, you expect to die, maybe subconsciously, and that's why this room looks different. If you were immortal, or if you did not know that you were mortal, this room would look different. Again, the way your mind works affects the way you see reality. This is also, by the way, going to have political implications. Michel Foucault talks about this very importantly, right? So being able to see the sun as the center of the solar system, that's not very politically important. But being able to see somebody as a witch, that has, or as a madman, or as a criminal, that has political implications. So we used to think that maybe sun was a god. Now we don't think that. We used to think that people were witches. Now we don't think that. So this is deep relation between power and knowledge. And Heidegger talks about this, how in ancient past, like in medieval Europe, for example, people thought of saints, like some people were seen as saints. That's not a category we by and large we have anymore. It's like, especially if you imagine a person who is just sitting there in the street begging. In the Middle Ages, you might have seen that person as a saint, and today, and somebody whom you envy, somebody whom you aspire to, God's chosen. And today you would say it's a vagabond. It's a homeless hobo. It's a distasteful, disrespectful, somebody you do not want to be. But maybe it's the same person, but you see them from different angles. So again, this perception to some extent is imagination. This is a very important topic in this entire course. So I keep talking about how in the natural sciences, data does not interpret itself. But in the social sciences, texts do not interpret themselves as well. So let me add this. So science is this creative enterprise. So it's not like scientists are led by observations. It's like scientists imagine ways the world could be somehow, who knows how, through creativity. And then the world seems to either conform or not conform. Karl Popper, a very important philosopher of science, talks about this a lot, how it's like Einstein, it's unclear how Einstein, first invented his theory of general theory of relativity. It seems to have just dawned on him. Like creative insight, creating a work of science is a bit like creating a work of art. And scientists have like a million, you can see certain echoes of natural selection here. Scientists can have like a million ideas, and most of them are going to be wrong, but one, like Einstein, is going to be right. So like you generate endless stream of ideas, and then you test them against data, and some of them are going to stick. But science is essentially creative. And again, science is not about truth, it's about credences. Which one is more useful, more or less useful. So let me continue, right? So because I want to get to I want to maybe come back to this pragmatic notion that I began the class with. So in the natural sciences, again, data does not interpret itself. In the social sciences, texts don't interpret themselves. Right? And this was a big discovery by Protestants, by Protestant theologians, because Protestants like Schleiermacher wanted to say, no, Catholics are wrong, and I am reading the Bible in the right way. But it turns out that before you can interpret the Bible, you need to have assumptions about the Bible. You need to assume what words mean. You need to, it's like, because the Bible is written partly in ancient Hebrew, partly in ancient Greek. Both of these languages are technically speaking dead and lost. You have modern reconstructions. You have people who speak fluently modern reconstructions of ancient Hebrew or of ancient Greek. But you cannot jump into the head into the heads of the people who wrote the Bible and like double check that the meaning is exactly right. So it could be that there are some words that we now use differently. And again, all of this, there's a very important picture we need to talk about, like hermeneutic circle, that before you can begin understanding, you already need to have assumptions. Our understanding, our vision of the world is always grounded in assumptions. And that's why human beings are always fallible. We are always prone to making mistakes. There's a very important chart. I need to add this to the slides. I'm sorry. I should have added this to the slide. But you know, it's okay. It's okay. I'm gonna show you the chart. I think I'll be able to do this. Well, anyway, I mean, what the chart is about is that there's an interesting relationship between theories and data in science. Again, it's a bit of a circle, like the hermeneutic circle. You start with particular assumptions, and you have a theory, and you use this theory to generate predictions, and you also use this theory to inform how you're going to make the experiment. Because again, it's like, if you think about this in terms of assumptions, like, again, I told you, interpreting the Bible, you need to assume what the words mean. Interpreting the skies, you need to assume how your telescope works, how the photons work. You see? And like, at the end of the day, this is not, wow, it's just the wrong book, I'm sorry. It's not an unproblematic, thing, because you're assuming. How can you prove your assumptions? You always have to rely on other assumptions. It's a wonderful book, Power of Dialogue, about Foucault and Gadamer. Two of my favorite philosophers in one book. It's a brilliant book. Maybe I'll talk about it at some point. But there's a chart. Of course, I wanted to look at this wonderful book, Philosophy of Social Science. I hope that the chart is here, and about the active character of perception. But we'll see. Maybe yes. Sorry. So I'm gonna paste this as a picture, but you can hopefully you can see this. I hope that the camera can focus on this, right? But you can see theories generate hypotheses. Using these hypotheses, you generate observations, and then observations don't interpret themselves. You need to generalize, and then you go back to theories. So there's the way that Martin Hollis breaks this down. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps, and it's a circle of 8 steps, and every step of the way is problematic. Human beings can make mistakes. There are errors and problems. How do you generalize data? How do you generate predictions from theories? Each of these steps is problematic. So I urge us to take contemporary naturalistic worldview very seriously, but I would be the first person to point out that the naturalistic worldview is problematic. In so many ways it's problematic. And again, it's like, people you see, this is very important. Like when you start doing philosophy of science, you're very often tempted to ask this question: could it be that the universe is a simulation? Could it be that Christianity is literally true? Could it be that Bhagavad Gita is literally true? Could it be that aliens exist? And the answer to all these questions is yes. Anything could be true for all we know. You know, as Jean-Paul Sartre says, this is why it's a very important quote: your tongue could turn into a centipede in the next moment. Your tongue could turn into a centipede in the next moment, right? But the ethos of this course is to try to think, the executive decision I'm making in this course is we're trying to think through the naturalistic worldview, right? So, and to me, again, Leibnizian teleological worldview and his theodicy, his attempts to explain away the problem of evil, is about as credible as Sartre's tongue turning into a centipede, right? And Nikolai, a wonderful physicist from Vienna, asked me this question: how can I put credences? How can I bet on teleological versus mechanistic worldview? And I want to say, yeah, I do place bets, right? Like, not in a gambling fashion, but placing bets in terms of like the way you structure your day, the way you structure your life. Like, I woke up this morning, and like one of the things that's on my mind is that, you know, it's autumn, and you know, I could catch a flu. if nothing else, right? So it's, you know, my chances of catching a flu are higher. And so I'm thinking about this, low-key, it's in the back of my head, and I'm paying attention to it. I'm spending some effort, you know, maybe trying to prevent that. But I'm not imagining that my tongue could turn into a centipede in the next moment. Or at least that's so low on my list of priorities that it's like, it's not the kind of thing I'm going to spend calories or time thinking about. or that through vacuum decay the universe is going to explode in the next moment. That's also a possibility. So in exactly same fashion, I am not, to me, the level of incredibility of Leibnizian picture is exactly the same as the level of incredibility of my tongue turning into a centipede. Like the crazy, conspiracy theories, it's like COVID vaccines used to mind control people. Could it be true? Could it be true? In principle, if you want to be a good scientist, you should say there's at least some non-zero probability that conspiracy theory is true. It's wild. I'm not recommending you bet on it, but maybe 0.00001% chance that it's true. At least you have to give. Telling the story of Boltzmann brains or telling the story of Descartes' evil demon, right? So there's some possibility that even flat Earth may be true. If you imagine movie The Matrix, right? It's like the machines, right, synthesize certain ideas in our head, but secretly the Earth is actually flat, right? So that there's always this kind of possibility, but I'm not counting on that. So, and this brings me back to my previous slide. That again, I take philosophy as a deeply pragmatic enterprise. Our existence is a problem for us, and we do not have, as far as I can tell, we do not have access to capital V values. So the only thing that we are left with is small v values, and the small v values are happiness. Why? Because, and I want to compare the word happiness to the word health, because you do not need an argument to explain why you want to be happy. Wanting to be happy is something that we do. Again, this is naturalistic ethics. This is attempt to naturalize ethics, right? As Hobbes says, whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire is what man calls good, and the object of man's hate and aversion is what man calls evil. But there's nothing simply and absolutely so. And Hobbes is going to say that, it's like certain religious traditions that could say, no, actually something else is good. Hobbes is going to say that's the object of their appetite or desire. Let's say devout Christian monks believe that mortifying the flesh will get them to paradise, and that's why they mortify the flesh. That's a kind of perverse, mistaken desire. People like Hobbes, Hume, or Nietzsche are going to say. Make your own conclusions, but they're kind of, you understand. This is like in philosophy, it's controversial. If some people are right, other people are wrong. So I want to talk about happiness and health. It's an immanent criterion, because again, we all always already, we want to be happy. We all want to be happy. Immediately people are going to jump in and say, well, but how about people who are suicidal or people who, harm themselves? And it's a good question, but I feel that the response has to be sometimes the circumstances in which you find yourself are so deleterious, so broken that they lead you to do this. Let me try to rephrase this in the following fashion. A person who's feeling suicidal prefers to die, finds it less painful to die than to continue living. This is my preliminary attempt at explaining this. By the way, suicide is no joke. If you are, while listening to this lecture, if you're feeling unwell, please seek professional help. Okay, this is, as a responsible teacher, I have to say this. This is actually a deeply problematic and slightly personal topic I need to talk about maybe at some point. Again, I am not a professional psychotherapist. Again, if you are depressed, please seek professional help. It's available. So anyway, immanent criterion. We all want to be happy, and also very importantly, we all know what happiness feels like. We all want to be happy, always already without a separate argument. And again, the way to sort of try to bring in Heidegger occasionally back into this picture is that Heidegger is going to say most of the things that we do are unconscious. It's not like Descartes. I make this rational, conscious, free, uncaused decision. This is a casu sui, right? As Spinoza would say, the cause of myself. I am the cause of myself. No, Heidegger says, I wake up in the morning and so many things I do automatically. Human beings are creatures of habit and custom. And this is true. David Hume says this, but also Martin Heidegger says this. It's like, I don't choose to do so many things. It's like human beings are Lichtung, our existence shines through us. We are I don't want to say epiphenomenal, but we are parts of something larger than ourselves. We are parts of nature, and Heidegger wants us to be attentive to the mystery of nature. And we are also parts of the social world. And again, so many things, so many assumptions, so many of the things we do not because we have chosen to, but because we find ourselves with this body, with its desires, and often the body takes over, like me taking this sip of glass of water or breathing in the air. I don't need to consciously decide to do this. My body does this automatically, right? Or all sorts of cultural practices, like being able to speak a language, or finding a job of a university professor to be respectable, right? I am happy, it strokes my ego that I am a university professor, right? I did not choose to do that. I am born into a culture which passes on these kinds of judgments, right? It's not my free choice to value this as opposed to something else. So again, we always already want to be happy without a separate argument. And we all know what happiness is from within. Like, empirically, we have access to happiness from within our head. And immediately, let me say, this is not an unproblematic concept. So, okay, let me write. So, social criticism, progress, and also, being happy is an art, the same way being healthy is an art. So it's not easy to become happy, and it's not easy to become healthy. And sometimes you may think that you are healthy, but in fact you are terribly sick. And sometimes you may mistakenly think that you are happy, whereas in fact you are suffering. So social criticism, progress, and you can make mistakes, and also it is an art or a science to become happy. So again, let's talk about social criticism and progress. So cultures very often will tell you bad things that are going to make you unhappy or unhealthy. And again, you see, keep talking about Leibniz, theodicy, religious worldview. Again, tomorrow we're going to start talking with the first-year students about ancient sophists, Callicles, Thrasymachus, Antiphon, or Critias. Critias, for example, would say, it's not gods who make men. It is men who make gods, who invent gods. Critias. Men invent gods for reasons of social control. To impose social control. This symbolic violence. Like, it's not like, you see, Leibniz has this teleological worldview. It's like, it's not innocent. The teleological worldview has very important, very natural, conservative implications. It's like Aristotle was a teleologist, and he said this world is the best of all possible worlds. Everything that exists for a reason. So if some people are slaves, they are slaves for a reason. That's conservatism. That's conservatism, right? And, I'm not saying that the teleological worldview is evil. I'm not saying that it's evil. But I'm saying that it's dangerous to some extent. And the mechanistic worldview also could be misused. But I feel that there's a certain, thinking through these issues, saying that, we want to be happy, and, it is a science of how do we become happy individually and as a society. You could say, well, you know what? Slavery is actually bad. It's bad for the slaves, but it's also bad for the slave owners. And in fact, freer societies are happier societies, maybe, right? This is the Enlightenment project. Or John Stuart Mill is going to say that we should give equal rights to men and women because this is going to make women happier, but this is also going to make men happier, and is also going to make society more productive and more progressive. It's like, if you give women right to education, women will become the scientists who cure your diseases, men. So it's in your interest to give. So you see, it's a kind of progressive project. And I still haven't gotten to my 3 rules of method. This slide has gotten completely out of control. So pragmatism. But let me talk about something else. before I talk about my 3 rules of method, if I'm actually going to be able to talk my 3 rules of method, let me talk about, again, naturalist ethics or naturalist values. So again, as I mentioned, we don't talk about naturalists, don't talk about values with capital V, but we talk about small v values. We find ourselves with desires, always already find ourselves with desires. And again, let me try to be as clear as possible. Let me start somewhere. So if you take some kind of an advanced University of London course, like this is one of my favorite courses in the University of London, Sociological Theory and Analysis. It's SC 2163. So wonderful course, and Alex Kalinikas's book, Social Theory, is an official textbook for this course. So if you look at the kinds of philosophers, mostly, that Kalinikas talks about, or if you take my course in modern political theory, let's have some names. So we talk about 6 philosophers, and this is actually, I'm teaching this as a part of a department, so these 6 names is not my choice. This is not my choice. This is the requirement of the department. I don't choose these 6 names. So we talk about Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Mill, Hegel, and Marx. So these are the 6 names chosen for me by the administration, by the department, as the most important minds of the Western political philosophical tradition, modern Western political philosophical tradition, right? So Locke is a bit complicated. I want to bracket Locke for the moment. But these other 5 names, Hobbes, Rousseau, Mill, Hegel, and Marx. Hegel also with a bit of a question mark, because you can have left Hegelian secular interpretations of Hegel or right Hegelian, maybe even fascist interpretations of Hegel. But, I am a strong believer in a liberal left Hegelian reading of Hegel. Again, what I'm driving at is all these 6 names, as far as I can tell, are naturalists. Or at least their project is basically compatible with naturalism. It's like, okay, Hegel has this important religious element, it's true. But at the end of the day, Hegel is going to say that your objective duty to God is the same as your subjective duty to yourself. So your subjective inclination to be happy is in complete harmony at the end of history with your objective duty to your nation and to your God. So what I'm driving at is that Hobbes, Rousseau, Mill, Hegel, and Marx are all going to agree that human happiness is the highest value. Human, individual, subjective happiness is the only / highest source of value. Okay? So when I am fighting my battle, I have these 6 names, Locke with a bit of a question mark, I don't want to get into the weeds, and Hegel also maybe with a slight question mark, but I'm prepared to defend my interpretation, okay, of Hegel as a naturalist, okay? Ask me sometime, maybe we'll do a Q&A. Well, actually, it's like, as a matter of fact, I have a lecture on Hegel on Coursera available right now. If you want, you can go watch that and hear my naturalistic interpretation of Hegel. But also, very importantly, since time immemorial, let me talk about Buddha. 2 very important Buddhist philosophers, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu. Somebody should do a presentation on these guys. Bandhu. Vasubandhu. Right. Wow, I cannot spell it all. So there's Buddha, there's Democritus and Epicurus. The ancient Greek atomists, and I'm not gonna add Lao Tzu to the slide because I have my interpretation, and I do want to interpret Lao Tzu as a naturalist, but my knowledge of Taoism is slightly more rusty than my knowledge of the Buddhist or of the Epicurean tradition. So Buddha, Democritus, but also Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are all going to say that happiness is equal to virtue, is equal to knowledge. So like in Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, you do have this ideal of happiness. Like Socrates, Plato are not gonna ask you to, stand on a pillar and mortify flesh. So all this is again like Nietzschean affirmation of life. Now, Buddha, of course, is a deeply controversial figure here. Saying Buddha and Nietzsche in one sentence is is a faux pas, because Nietzsche famously thought that Buddhists, like the Christians, were nihilists and denied life. But that's okay. That's okay. You can have different interpretations. Okay, my interpretation of Buddhism is Nietzschean, and my interpretation of Nietzsche is Buddhist. I think you can make it work. So it's like, and by the way, it's like, maybe I should add this as another slide. This is something that happens all the time. So the story, which is the old as the woods. I'm just going to do this for fun. So Buddha was not a Buddhist. Epicurus was definitely not an Epicurean. Jesus was not a Christian, probably, as far as we can tell. He doesn't even, the word Christianity was not coined back then. Does Jesus actually call himself the Christ? Does he call himself the Messiah? Open the Bible, try to find the verses. In the Gospel of Mark, the earliest gospel, as far as historians tell. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, like, can you interpret Jesus as a Christian? Yes, but it's a problematic interpretation. So Nietzsche was not a Nietzschean. Mill, not a utilitarian. I'm sorry. And Marx, not a Marxist. Okay? So, and the list goes on. This is an important reminder. We need to see complexity where other people see simplicity. Anyway, it's a methodological precaution, but I wanted to get this out there somehow. So Heidegger, not an existentialist, should also be on the list. So again, I'm going to switch this to Q&A, but like in general, well, maybe I should talk about my 3 rules of method, right? So fallibilism is a very important rule that I aspire to. That human mind is limited. We could always be wrong. We could always be wrong, and there are a million examples of this. But very importantly, kind of by way of consequences, like what is it? So what is the consequence of fallibilism? What should we do with this understanding? I want to appeal to John Stuart Mill, and this is, to me, this is similar to what Karl Popper is saying, a very important philosopher of science, and similar to what Paul Feyerabend, another very important philosopher of science, is saying. And Mill has this ideal of free speech, sort of examining the best argument on the other side. Best argument on the other side. The ideal of free and equal discussion. And so specifically in Mill, what this leads to, Mill says the following. So first of all, your opinion might be false. So your view might be false. And you can never guarantee that. So it always pays to listen to the other side. So, I'm proposing naturalistic worldview in this course, but my view could be false. So it's a good idea for me to examine the best arguments against naturalism. And actually, I do that a lot. In the 5 courses that I teach, we examine all sorts of arguments on the other side. And I encourage everybody to do presentations. About Leibniz or about Tom Nagel, whatever. And other philosophers. Extensively teach Aristotle in many courses. Anyway, so your view might be partially false. So this is another thing that Mill says. You could say it's the same thing, but whatever. But Mill says, very often, truth is somewhere in the middle, and by colliding the 2 views, you get closer to the truth. So maybe naturalism is partly false and partly true, and teleology is partly false and partly true, and maybe you need to collide the two, and you will get closer to the truth. Sounds like a reasonable suggestion. And then Mill says that even if your view is completely true, you do not know the reasons for your view. You hold your view as mere prejudice without understanding, with no understanding, unless you know how to defend your view from the best criticism. You cannot claim to understand something unless you understand the best argument on the other side. So this, students who are going to write University of London exams, this is always very important. This is super important on the exam, right? That you have to provide the best arguments against your view. Super important, always. It's important pedagogically, bureaucratically in terms of your grade, but also I think philosophically it's important. But the last point is that Mill talks about heartfelt conviction. It's a very interesting point. Again, Mill says that, let's say if you're a Christian, this is the exact example that Mill gives. If you're a Christian, unless you allow Christianity to be hotly contested, you will not have deep, you will be a Christian in name only. You will not have a heartfelt conviction unless you allow your view to be challenged. So this is an argument against heresy hunts. This is an argument against, anti-blasphemy laws. That true religiosity, true conviction, sincere conviction is impossible unless it is contested. Unless again, well, you understand, unless you exist in this marketplace of ideas. So this is definitely a very important part of what I wanted to talk about today. So there you have it. So let me try to maybe bring this to a bit of a close. So my 3 rules of method are fallibilism, skepticism, and empiricism. Let me, again, sorry. So back a step. So I talk about how we need to examine naturalism. So I do not want you to just jump to the conclusion that naturalism is true. But you see, the problem is that most students I talk to have no idea about what naturalism is. For most students, the natural position that they have is teleological position. And so for the vast majority of students, it is pedagogically, it is much better, it is much more useful to examine arguments against teleology. It's secretly useful for me to examine arguments against naturalism, but that's not the business we're in our introductory courses. For the vast majority of students, the most payoff that they will get is by examining best arguments against teleology. Because most students naturally are, our thinking is naturally teleological. There's an evolutionary psychological argument for that against teleology. And I talk about prejudice, and this is very important. You see, and this is something that I feel is kind of wrong about our educational system, about the way philosophy classes are taught. Because so often people come to a class in philosophy with their prejudice, and they hope and expect that the philosophy class will simply reaffirm their prejudice. And I feel that it's bad in all sorts of ways. It's disingenuous and it's counterproductive, right? So you shouldn't you go to an archery range. So you try to you start studying archery. You don't expect to hit bullseye every time from your first lesson. You expect to miss a lot. In the same fashion, when you embark on an intellectual journey, you shouldn't expect that just miraculously all of your prejudices are going to be true. Chances are that most of your prejudices are false. This was definitely true for me. In the 20 years that I've been doing philosophy professionally, approximately, I've been teaching philosophy for 10 years, but doing philosophy for about 20, give or take. Most of the prejudice I had 20 years ago, I don't have anymore. They were wrong, completely wrong, and not just wrong, but harmful. Wrong and harmful. And so, again, I talked about this in the beginning of the previous lecture, that I feel that a naturalist project has this very important civilizing mission, that by understanding mechanistic worldview, we're going to understand nature better, we're going to understand ourselves better, treat ourselves better, in terms of physical health, but also psychic health, psychological health. But we're also going to treat our immediate others better, and we're also going to, make some headway into understanding politics also better. So, Um, yeah. Let's see how we're doing for time. You know what? Let me. There's so many things I also wanted to talk about, and I did not really get to talk about Heidegger, even though I promised that this lecture is going to be about Heidegger. But it's okay. Again, these are important topics, and I really, really, really wanted to get them out. So let me pause here, and let me take questions, and then we'll see how it goes. Maybe even today. Maybe even today we'll I'll record another stream. Yeah, there's a lot of comments in the chat. Very clever, good comments. I need to respond to them. So Leibniz, Theodicy, the Lisbon earthquake, Voltaire's Candide. This is super important. We need a whole video. We need a whole video to talk about this carefully. You know what? It's like maybe for people who are not gonna watch the video that's gonna come. Let me at least make a list of the questions which I feel are important questions. So Leibniz's Theodicy. So is this really the best of all possible worlds? Now, again, for people who are not going to watch my video on Leibniz, Leibniz talks about analytic statements, infinitely analytic statements. So Leibniz actually by construction of his argument, the only being in the universe who can actually see and verify that this world is the best of all possible worlds is only God. It is merely an assumption for Leibniz, merely an assumption, because again, by construction, the belief that this world is the best of all possible worlds is as he calls it, an infinitely analytical statement. Which means fans of Turing machines, that you can get to these conclusions, but only in an infinite number of steps. You need an infinite number of logical steps to get to the conclusion that this world is the best of all possible worlds. So best of all possible worlds. And again, by construction, Leibniz is going to say only God is capable of doing that. So another topic I'll either address in a Q&A or do a separate video about is God. We already spoke about this with some of the groups. What do you mean by God? It's like people lack imagination. There are so many different ways to imagine what God or gods are. To say that you believe in God or not believe in God is not to say anything at all. It's like to say that you have watched a movie. Like, which movie have you watched? Black and white, silent movie, or latest blockbuster, or are you a fan of Mikhail Haneke? Some art house, interesting. Sorry. It's like, or I have read a book. Like, which book? A comic book about Mickey Mouse, or Joyce's Ulysses. So in books can be different, gods can be different, and it's like I feel this is also a bit of I'm somewhat sympathetic to the new atheist movement. I need to talk about Dennett. At some point, because Dennett is very important. I need to talk about Dennett, and I need to talk about my resources for the course. Because people who are taking this course for credit know what I assign and see my assignments in Microsoft Teams. But people on YouTube don't know what I assign. So I want to discuss the texts that I assign in this course, because give us a chance to talk about them. Dennett is counted among the new atheists. And I'm a big fan of Dennett, but I also think that new atheism is a bit misguided because they want to rationalize human existence too much. It's like they say, oh, religion is irrational. Yes, but human beings are irrational. You have to believe 16 irrational things to get out of bed in the morning. So in this sense, I feel that the new atheists are a bit too hard on religion. So I have an interesting argument against the new atheists. New atheists. Another thing I wanted to mention with this respect is that Heidegger, right? So Heidegger is not a naturalist in a straightforward fashion, and Heidegger would urge us to be attentive to, well, to what? To the mystery of existence. Mystery of existence. And I want to say that there's an ancient and venerable attitude in theology. It's called apophatic theology. And I could mention a couple names here, maybe Plotinus, who's to a large extent maybe the source of apophatic theology. In fact, Socrates says in Plato's Republic that the idea of the good is beyond being in beauty and power, something like that, beyond being, right? So you can see traces of apophatic theology in Plato's Republic already. So Plato's Republic, Plotinus, and there's also this person whose name is, well, who's referred to in the literature as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. A very important early Christian writer. And it's like, I want to say that in an important sense, certain versions of certain ways of reading this book, certain versions of Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hindu monotheism, I think Heidegger would simply find blasphemous. Like if you literally believe that the origin of the universe is some old dude with a beard sitting on a cloud, you are being blasphemous. You are not being attentive to the mystery of existence. So this is a criticism which is very often leveled against science and scientism, that, oh, science makes everything crass and oversimplifies things. Well, popular forms of religion oversimplify things. So it's not like, I don't think that scientists are to blame, and I don't think religion is to blame. I think people in general, like thinking is a difficult skill. Thinking is an art. Most people are not good at it. Okay, so most scientists, most people who are familiar with science are not good at it. And most people who are familiar with religion are not good at it. So it's, like we equally don't understand important things about life. So Call Me Shibboleth also talks about, like, if God is dead, everything is permissible. Yeah. So notice, I mentioned this last time in my lecture about naturalism. So again, it's like, I feel that, it's like people who have been brought up within the religious worldview, this is their first inclination. It's like, what do you mean? Like, if God is dead, then I can do whatever. But the answer in somebody like Hobbes, or in somebody like Hume, or in somebody like Nietzsche, or in somebody like Heidegger, no, you are thrown into this world with values, desires, beliefs. You cannot choose to not want to drink water. You cannot choose to not want to be thirsty. You cannot choose to not fall in love. Some people don't for psychological or physiological reasons, but most of us do. And it's like it's not our free choice. It's something that happens to us. So it's not like everything is permissible. It's like thick description of human beings. This is another topic. Again, this is rambling. It's a Q&A portion of the video, so you'll have to forgive me. It's even more chaotic. But it's like most of my students are most of my students in this course who are taking this course for credit are second-year students. So when I was a second-year student, I had a course in sociology. And one of my friends, who was also interested in philosophy and who was, very much a skeptic, like a Humean-style skeptic, said this very interesting thing. He said, what do you mean sociology? We cannot even prove that other minds exist. I cannot even prove that you are conscious. How can we do sociology if we cannot even prove that other people are conscious? And you see, I want to take this, I want to affirm and reject this statement at the same time. So first of all, I think this statement is very valuable. This is a very valuable experience of vertigo. Like when you begin to do philosophy, you need to experience this understanding, right? This is Sartre's centipede. To do philosophy is to be open to radical possibilities. I have to be open to the possibility that Leibniz is right. I have to be open to the possibility that my tongue will turn into a centipede in the next moment. I have to be open to the possibility that other minds don't exist and solipsism is true, right? But at the same time, you see, it's like this is Heidegger. This is, Heidegger is in the title of this lecture, so I'm at least mentioning Heidegger from time to time. Heidegger is going to say, yeah, but biographically, you find yourself in a particular situation. Ask yourself, what has happened to you this morning? What has happened to you last Friday, last year? Describe your life in the past 10 years. Something happens. There is a biography that you can tell. You cannot guarantee it's true, but there's a biography. And this friend of mine went on to get a PhD in philosophy. And right now, this is personal and oversharing and for privacy reasons. I don't want to go into any detail. But right now, they're going through a deeply distressing personal tragedy. So when my friend was in the second year, they were sitting in a classroom. They said to the university professor, "What is sociology? How do I even know that other minds are conscious?" And right now, about 15, 20 years later, they are going through a deeply problematic personal tragedy. They find themselves in a situation. The situation imposed itself on them, and they have to deal with it. It's real world limitations. This is an old argument against solipsism. You might have heard this, right? Like, this is talking about Bishop Berkeley. There was a doctor who said, like, you strike your leg on a stone and you feel a jolt of pain. So you can imagine that the tongue will turn into a centipede, or you can imagine that this universe is just a figment of your imagination and nothing is real, but the pain is real. Again, solipsist with an appendicitis. Let me write this. Solipsist with an appendicitis. Right? So it's like you can be skeptical of the other minds, but then reality imposes itself on you. And Maxime is asking, what is pragmatism? This is basically pragmatism. This is my pragmatical reading of Heidegger. So it's like real world concerns. And notice, this pragmatic arguments are not logical arguments. So pragmatism is not about logic. It's not logic, but passions. Passions, desires. It's like, I believe that this water will not poison me, not because I have a rational reason that can guarantee that, but because I have an irrational desire to take a sip and my body takes over. So, let me add a couple more points to the slide, and gradually I'm going to be wrapping this up. And so these are all, I would say, topics for future classes. So, hermeneutics. I need to explain this in detail. So hermeneutics, as far as I know, comes from the name of the Greek word Hermes, who was the messenger god. And hermeneutics is the science of interpreting, or the art of interpreting messages. Hermeneutics is the philosophical discipline which deals with the questions of interpretation. And one important area of hermeneutics is biblical hermeneutics, right? So it's like, how do you interpret the Bible? And Colmy Shibboleth, very importantly, talks about how, again, this book did not just descend down from the sky. This book was assembled from scrolls of papyrus by bureaucrats in the Roman imperial administration who had an axe to grind. So it's like, the emperor and his generals took some part in the meeting of the bishops, who were also political, to some extent political leaders, who came together and decided which scrolls count as authoritative and how we should read these scrolls. So it's like, even if your attitudes toward Christianity or other religions may be different, but it's undeniable that what Critias and what Feuerbach is saying is to an extent true, right? That religion is a human thing, and religion also has political implications. And very often, religion could be misused for political reasons. So you cannot just automatically trust prophets. As Hobbes is going to say, prophets are people, and people can lie and be misled and be mistaken. This book also assembled hundreds of years after Buddha died from particular scrolls. And this, by the way, this is just one formulation of the teaching of Buddha. It's not the only one. It's like, think of Zen Buddhism, think of Pure Land Buddhism, think of Tiantai Buddhism, or Shingon Buddhism. 4 very different versions of Buddhism, which will give you different life advice. Biblical interpretation. So, selection. Yes. Selection. Yeah. And another topic I want to at least note that it exists, and we need to talk about this, is again, like, science is not about certainty, it is about credences. The best place to explore this is Bayesian epistemology. Again, it's going to take a whole separate lecture. If you want, look at my lecture from last year about epistemology. It's available in the playlist. And if you want to do presentations on this, this is your best book. especially chapter, let me tell you which chapter it is. Chapter 4. It's called Spiders, Ants, and Bees. Chapter 4, Spiders, Ants, and Bees. This is by far the best chapter. And it goes basically from Francis Bacon, to Quine and Kuhn. Willard Van Orman Quine and Thomas Kuhn. It's an excellent chapter. So, Bayesianism in general is this notion that, again, you can never fully confirm or fully reject a certain view. Evidence increases your credibility or decreases your credibility. But it never goes to 100%, never goes to 0%. Okay, so in some sense, this lecture has been going on until we run out of time. So I feel that we have actually run out of time right now. So I'm gonna pause here. Some people are probably waiting for me in Microsoft Teams, so I'm gonna go there and see if we have any questions there. But in general, my schedule is a bit crazy these days, but I do hope to record more of these discussions and elaborate a bit more on these topics. But in general, colleagues, I think that the class is doing well. Some of the presentations we've already had were excellent. Nikita's presentation on the Big Bang, Fiona's presentation on Darwinian Revolution, wonderful. So let me just cut the stream here. So thank you, everybody, for all your contributions. They matter a lot. Until next time, stay safe and take care.